Hello my loves, and welcome back to this here little bookish corner of the internet. Is that an intro? Maybe that's becoming an intro. Today I am not going to talk for a long time in my intro, and I'm just going to kind of, after a very long break from YA, make the case for YA again by telling you about 3 really great YA books I have read recently. They do have a lot of similarities because really they're all about the search for identity and the search for personhood as a teenager, which is kind of a unique set of circumstances. And I think that's part of the reason why I enjoyed them so much and why I remember how much I enjoyed YA, because truly, I think the teenager's experience is really important, not just to teenagers, but also to adults. And there's some kind of intellectual superiority, I think, especially in the bookish community, which says that once we graduate to being adults, we shouldn't give any of our time to the kind of ridiculous, inconsequential struggles that teenagers face, which is in itself ridiculous in my opinion, because we all went through that. And not only do we get to look upon that maybe with a certain sense of nostalgia, or at least a sense of remembering those feelings and being filled with them for a while, but also we get to suddenly acquire this whole newfound sense of empathy for the teenagers around us. And in my opinion, and as we can see from everything that's happening with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, teenagers are the answer to many of the world's questions, especially right now. So I personally think that even if we're not teenagers anymore, we should afford them the respect of listening to their stories and hearing their stories and maybe even telling them, and understanding that that doesn't make us any less of a good reader, it doesn't make us any less of a serious reader. We're just reading diversely in a way that we should always think to. So yes, I read about identity, I fell in love with all of these books, and I want to tell you about them. The first one I want to tell you about, well, I guess they're all quite hyped, but whatever, it's fine. I'm going to tell you anyway. Who cares? Again, with the intellectual superiority, I don't always have to read super obscure books that no one's ever heard of. Sometimes it's okay to read hyped books and enjoy them. So the first one is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Saenz. And I listened to this on audiobook, narrated by none other than the genius Lin-Manuel Miranda, and now I have to listen to absolutely everything he narrates on Audible because it was amazing. I loved it. We followed Ari during a summer holiday. I think he must be about 15. He's quiet and okay with being alone, but he's also kind of sad and angry for no particular reason, and is sort of afflicted with the weight of the universe, as I remember very keenly from being a teenager. That sort of weight that was on my shoulders that was kind of unexplainable and super suffocating. So there you go. He thinks he's going to do nothing in the summer. He's living, I believe, in Texas. He's part of a Mexican-American family, and his brother is in prison. His dad is a vet from the Vietnam War, and no one talks about his brother. It's kind of this massive silence in their family that's weighing on all of them heavily. And so he thinks he's just going to carry on avoiding life and avoiding his home for the summer until he meets Dante at a public pool one day. And I guess the book is the story of their friendship and their budding relationship. And I love it. It's my type of book in that it's not necessarily super plot driven. It's about these characters and their search for themselves. It's about the fact that they're kind of straddling 2 worlds in a lot of ways. The world between teenagehood and adulthood, the world you inhabit before you come out, and whilst you're exploring your sexuality, where you kind of are not sure what you are and you're letting yourself be carried by that wave, and that can be scary and exciting and lovely and terrifying all at the same time. And so you just kind of follow these boys as they get to know each other. Dante is an amazing character. He's a bit of a know-it-all, but he also sees the world in a really interesting way, which he passes on to Ari. And you know, I think the glory of it for me was how not cliched it was, and how I really bought these 2 teenage characters. Sometimes the problem with YA is that the adult authorial voice can be really obvious, especially when you're reading as an adult. You feel like this is definitely an adult writing as teenagers, but something about the way this was written just kind of completely took that away for me. And these characters existed in their teenagehood unapologetically, and I love how confused they were and how acutely I could feel that. I think it's super well written. It doesn't fall victim to the cliches of young adult literature, and it's just this relationship just absolutely exists. You fall in love with both of these characters and the world that they live in, and I think it was brilliantly well done. I wish that I had had that book to read as a teenager. It won the Prince Award very deservedly. That's a big award in the world of YA fiction. And it was fun to read some LGBT fiction, which was so true, I think, to the experience of exploring yourself, and didn't judge that, and also didn't make it the absolute center of the tale. And it's really sad and it will make you cry, but it's also really happy and really joyful, and it's not the kind of like tragic gay love story that exists in a lot of ways. I think it could be one to give a lot of hope to teenagers and adults alike. So there you go. I loved it, especially narrated by Lin-Manuel Miranda. There's some Spanish in it, which was fun to hear him narrate, and I highly recommend. I think, although we're talking about young adult fiction, it is time for us to drink a cocktail. Thank you. This, ladies and gents, mostly ladies, I'm not an equal analytics kind of gal on this YouTube channel. This is the Gin Air, as in Jane Eyre. Yep, makes me want to cry too. I'm never sure if I love or hate puns, but I think I hate them, which is kind of sad. Okay, the alcohol is really strong. Not sure if I pulled a face, but it's absolutely delicious. I love things that are super citrusy. And this is. So let's enjoy this while we talk about the next two books. The second book I have for you today is another one that's super hyped, but let me tell you, it's worth it. It's The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. If you have not read this yet, you might have seen it around again recently. I don't think it's even left the NYT bestsellers list, to be honest. But it's being talked about again recently because they're making it into a movie, and they had a cast attached, and then one of the cast was removed in pretty awful circumstances. So that's your fun fact for the day. But another one that I really loved. We follow 16-year-old Star, who is living in a rough neighborhood, a suburb I guess, called Garden Heights, which is populated by a lot of gangs, exists in kind of a framework of violence, and her parents have sent her to school in a more affluent neighborhood, in a school filled with white people, where she's kind of the odd one out. She's kind of struggling with how to fit in, how to make friends with all these people that are very unlike her. So from the get-go, we kind of have this built-in identity crisis of who is Star in Garden Heights and who is Star when she's at school, and how does she kind of negotiate those two identities or merge them together. But the crux of this book, and this is no spoiler because it says it everywhere, but is that one night Star is at a party and her friend Khalil, who has been her best friend since she was very young, is shot by a white police officer. Now clearly he's black. So really this book looks into the Black Lives Matter movement from a first person perspective and kind of brings us closer to these police shooting of black men and black boys, in the sense that sadly, because they happen so often, I think that a lot of us have become complacent, in my opinion anyway, with the kind of feelings that are brought out of us when it happens. A lot of our reactions seem to be not again, as opposed to really feeling the pain, which is what happens when bad things happen over and over again and nothing is done to change them. And so for me, I think that's the beauty of this book, is that it brings you straight slap bang in the middle of it and gives you no choice but to confront a lot of feelings about this epidemic, to be frank, of police brutality that we're experiencing in America. Quick aside that I also want to say that America is not the only one. England has a police brutality problem as well, and often I see a lot of English people lamenting the police brutality in America without really looking in the mirror to consider that perhaps it is also happening in their country too. Only this morning, a black boy mysteriously became unwell in police custody in England and died, and I think that regardless of on which side of the ocean it happens, we should question that. Yeah, it's a real problem and it's devastating and it's terrifying. So we are drowning in this situation with Star as she is confronted with this problem, and not only is she traumatized by what happened to her best friend, but she also happens to be the only witness of this shooting, which means that she is also having to embark on all these legal proceedings and figuring out, you know, where she stands as a witness when it comes to the crime. So not only are we dealing with these questions of identity, but we're also dealing with what happens when you experience trauma as a teenager. What happens when you are a black teenager and you do have to experience these things, you know. In that way, this book felt like reality, not only because it's talking about something so current and so relevant and so important, but also because, just like in the last book, Star really jumps off the page, her family jump off the page, and it's all of it is so compelling, and it feels wrong to say that about something so awful, really. The what happens in the book is truly horrifying, and a teenager's grief takes front and center, and I think it works amazingly well, and it is compelling. In this, what's great, I think, is that even though it's told in first person perspective and we really experience this through Star's eyes, none of the other characters are kind of left by the wayside. I also listened to this on audiobook, and it was read, I'll put her name here, I can't remember, but it was read by someone who really read it so well, and the characters around Star are so fully formed, including Khalil, the boy who dies, which I think is another a testament to how great this book is and how well written it is, because you don't really get to exist with Khalil for a very long time since he dies so close to the beginning, but he really exists as a force in this book, and I think that goes some way towards showing, especially in cases of untimely and horrific death, the way in which people continue to exist past that for the people that they affected. I think it really forces you to just kind of, like I said at the beginning, open your eyes and realize that this is happening, and no matter what kind of bubble you exist in, no matter whether it might affect you or the people around you, or whether it's just other people in your neighborhood or even country, it is something that you need to deal with. It is something that needs to be talked about and discussed. And if we're really serious about keeping all of our citizens safe, then we need to address the problem of all these untimely deaths at the hands of police. It's raw, it's scary, it's great, and I encourage everyone to read it. And the last book that I have to talk to you about will be a bit briefer, purely because I vaguely mentioned it in this life update video here, which should be around my head somewhere. And that is Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. Another one I really loved. Like you guys know, I've always been a fan of John's work. I've met him a few times. He's a wonderful person, so is his brother, and the community that they've built around them is a huge part of my life. It's the reason why I am married, and it is the reason why I have many of the friends that I have. So it's hard for me to be unbiased about John's work, but I will tell you that I think this is his best book yet. It follows 16-year-old Asa, who suffers from OCD quite severely, and she descends into these, what are called in the book, thought spirals, which are basically ever-tightening, repetitive thoughts about the thing that is making her anxious, which then lead to compulsions to try and make her less anxious. It is the type of OCD that John suffers from, and there's been some talk also about whether or not I suffer from pure O, which is obsessive thoughts without the compulsion. That seems to be the way that my anxiety manifests itself, in these kind of ever-tightening loops of thought and stress and distress. So this spoke to me, like I said in the previous video, about my mental health in a way that no other book has ever spoken to me about my own personal experience. Asa meets a boy, and this boy's father has disappeared, and so Asa and her best friend and this boy kind of embark on the solving of this mystery. And that's kind of how the book is marketed on the back and in advertisements and whatever, as kind of this mystery, and oh, and by the way, Asa has OCD. And for me, that was a bit of an error. A lot of people are complaining that this book's plot was kind of lackluster, and whilst I really like John Green's writing, he is not the best at plotting. It's true, but I think in this case, at least to me, it seemed kind of purposeful. The entirety of the book is Asa's internal monologue, and so by definition her ability to solve this mystery, and her name is Asa Holmes, by the way, obviously meant to mirror Sherlock Holmes, her ability to solve this mystery is greatly negatively affected by the fact that she literally can't think about anything else than what is making her anxious. And for me, that spoke to my truth hugely, because no matter how much I might want to do something, no matter how motivated I am to find something out or carry out a task, sometimes I am completely paralyzed by what's going on in my head. And so for me, the fact that that particular mystery plot wasn't super elucidated in this kind of made sense, and there was a rationale behind it, which I thought was kind of cute in a way. And by cute, I don't mean that the mental illness part of it was cute. I just meant that it kind of made sense to me. I also listened to this on audiobook. I didn't actually realize that I had listened to all three on audiobook until now, but hey, that's apparently the case. It was quite well narrated. I would say be careful if you are an anxious person. For me, it didn't make me more anxious, because I spent the whole listening experience feeling so happy that someone had put on paper the types of thoughts, or at least the brand of thoughts, that I experience on a daily basis. Not exactly, of course, because Asa is not me and I am not Asa, but just the kind of scarily imprisoning nature of these obsessive thoughts. I so believed him, and I think the reason why it's his best book yet is because it comes directly from his own lived experience. And so yes, he might be writing as a 16-year-old girl, but he's also writing as a person with OCD. And I have heard him talk about this interview that I'll link below. His NPR Fresh Air interview with Terry Gross is probably one of the most candid interviews he's ever given, and I think it gives some insight into his head and also what it was like to write a book about the type of mental illness that you're experiencing at the time of writing, which I think must be scary and is very brave. I encourage anyone to read it, but especially those who have suffered and maybe in a lonely way with mental illness. Mental illness is super lonely, and mental illness tricks you into believing that the very way in which you're experiencing mental illness is singular only to you, and that therefore you're the only person in the entire world who's ever experienced this particular mixture of horrible, terrible, very bad feelings, which is really insidious if you think about it, because then the loneliness contributes to the mental illness, and it's just a whole cesspool of awful. In fact, that's not true. You are surrounded by people who are going through this, have been through this, have come out of it. And I think it's YA like this which will show a lot of kids that, and a lot of adults that too. I am so excited by the fact that parents might be able to read this book and better understand what their kids might be going through if they have OCD or this type of obsessive thought spirals. That really excites me because they are really hard to explain, and any words you give to them kind of belittle them and make them seem less terrifying than they really are. So I'm thankful to John for writing this book. I'm thankful to my community of nerdfighters for receiving it so well, and yeah, whether you've read a John Green book or not, it would make me happy if you tried it, and fingers crossed you trust me on that. And I think that is it for the night. Hopefully at least one of these recommendations made you want to pick up the book if you haven't already, or maybe reread them if it's been a while. We are due an Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe sequel, which is super exciting, and I think also a movie. I've kind of gone back to reading mostly adult stuff now, but I will be peppering in a bit more YA here and there. So if you'd like another YA recommendations video, then let me know, or thumbs up this video, or comment down below, and I will. I went through a period around university reading a lot of YA, so I do have some stuff to recommend. In the meantime, keep safe, keep happy, and keep reading, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye.